Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective. This is Think Design Stories. In this series, we will be going behind the scenes on one of the most iconic laptop brands ever conceived and is still going strong. Today I am joined by David Hill, who started with IBM in 1985 and was with them until May 2005 when the IBM ThinkPad division was purchased by Lenovo. Since then, David has held several positions between those two companies, including the Executive Director of Design, the Vice President of Corporate Identity and Design, and the Chief Design Officer and Vice President of Experience Design. When it comes to ThinkPads, there are few people that know more than he does. You managed to convince management to pull everybody together. You've got a central location, and you've got some pretty big tasks ahead of you. Like what were kind of those early days like for this brand new team?
Well, when I initially got the resource that worked for me, they still were co-located with the teams that they sort of majored on supporting.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to take this kind of in steps. So like the person, even though they worked for me, were still supporting, one particular function. They resided kind of with that function, which was okay because we would still get together as a team. But eventually I reconfigured the what was sort of a big display room and a conference room and a photo studio and a shop, reconfigured that into a studio so I could get everybody sitting in the same place. Because I felt like, well, I get the idea of co-location with the group that you're supporting. Get a desk over there so you can go over there once a day and show up and talk to people and kind of have a touchdown zone. But when you come back, you're in the design center. So it took some of these kind of steps like this to kind of create this energy and synergy without disrupting the business units who were scared to death. This new design center was somehow going to ruin their business because they would lose focus. They'd be working on something that they didn't want to work on. So I always had to keep my eye on that and make sure I was having regular meetings with general managers and updating them what's happening. And then, we started actually developing this stuff and getting it into tooling, and people liked it. And we started winning design awards. And I also changed the way that Richard Sapper interacted with the team. Previously, he would there were these formal design reviews where people would stand up in a room with, I'm really going to date myself, 35 millimeter slides and a slide projector and go click, click, here's the front view of the monitor, click, click, here's the side view and all this. And he would, make some comment like, is this done? And then the designer would say, would look at their little piece of paper, like this, shipped last week. Like, oh my God, what are we doing? It's like kind of crazy. And so I told Richard I wanted to abolish these meetings. And he said, well, what am I going to do? I said, no, I'm going to change them. They're going to be jamborees. We're going to just have these work sessions and they'll be a week long. I'll fly you here. I'll have all the designers here and we'll all look at what we're doing and work on it. So like if you think something doesn't look right, we'll go in the back room and work on it. And so when you leave, it'll be what we all think is right, or at least be on a journey towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And we started calling these things eventually Sapper Fests. And they were great fun. And he really liked it because instead of being frustrated by these meetings where someone would show something and it was fait accompli, he could actually weigh in and say, I need a piece of paper, and he get a piece of paper and a pencil. and he would make a sketch of something, or we'd come back from lunch and he'd stop in the shop and work with somebody. I mean, he was sitting at people's desks who were like junior designers, only a year out of college. It's incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like getting a master's degree in design with this super famous guy who was an incredible designer. But I think reshaping those, so there's a lot of steps here, you know, working together on a big project, and then eventually getting the people working for me, and then co-locating them, and then changing the way that we reviewed and critiqued design, and then also spending time on advanced projects. So instead of just only designing the thing that's like immediately in front of you, thinking about the future. So I would have Richard work on certain things that I thought were important. Like, for instance, monitors. Monitors were CRTs in 1995. Every monitor was a CRT. It was just, how huge was it? And there was a sort of you could see an emerging trend for flat panels. They were kind of expensive and they were in this sort of the infancy, but you could see it coming. And so I told him, I said, I would like you to design a prototypical flat panel display. What do you think a flat panel display should look like? And he worked on this, and the design was fantastic. And we essentially, as the flat panels started coming into the actual roadmap, we used that as the prototypical design for it. And then we were able to prove that doing this kind of work was useful, because instead of just being, kind of caught with your pants down, you have to have the design next week for this whole new thing. You'd be like, well, we've been working on this for a year. We have ideas. That was another kind of important thing. And like I said, these jamborees or Sapperfests were fun. My assistant Bev, bless her heart, she would make cakes for these things.
Nice.
She'd make apple crisp that was to die for. And it became like a kind of fun thing to look forward to, rather than dreading having to stand up in front of a room with a 35 millimeter slide projector remote control and show him something and have to explain why it couldn't be changed because it had already been tooled.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you've got slides of it, that could imply it's pretty far along on its
You're pretty
production.
much done. Yeah, there were minor things, that you could do. And then you'd have to say, well, we'll catch that on the next one. It's like, well, that's not going to work. But like I said, when this thing started, I literally had no employees. When I moved here, I had the empty office with the trash can and the telephone, and I had 0 direct reports. And I remember talking to James, my manager at the time, and he said, by the way, I'm going to be transferring you a guy. And I said, who? And he said, it's the guy that works on the internet. He's a graphic designer. I said, oh, I know him. I said, well, what does he do? And he said, he works on the internet. And I said, okay, so you want me to have him? Yes, he's yours. I'm transferring him today. And he was a very talented designer, but he could sort of see at the light of the end of the tunnel was his retirement. And he wasn't very big on the idea of moving to Raleigh from Boca Raton, which he lived in a home that he designed with an architect and this kind of thing. So he was, I liked him. He did some cool things, but he was the only guy I had. That was it. Everything else was all relationship managed. But by the time I retired, the design organization was in, I think, 4 different countries with about 100 people. That's a long way from the empty office. And resource initially, he said, was first it was It was Dick with the graphic design guy. And then I hired another graphic designer because we were doing this huge project for Aptiva, which was a whole experiential user interface to help people understand to use PCs. And we were just way, way understaffed to do that kind of work. So I hired another graphic designer, and then I get the other people with me. And there was a big missing link, I felt, which was human factors.
Mm.
And Peter Hortensius had sort of hired a guy to work on human factors, borrowed him from another division in Raleigh. Didn't really work for him. He was kind of a loner. And I thought it was great because I always had a really good experience in Minnesota with human factors people. These were like PhD, you know, cognitive psychologists and hardware human factors experts and working on big iron. How do you extract cards from a card cage without, how do you do it without tools or these kinds of things. It was fascinating stuff. And they knew a lot about video display terminals and keyboards and stuff like this. And so we started expanding the number of people that we would sort of borrow from this other group. And pretty soon the other group, they didn't have anything to do. All they did was work for us. So I made a case to get them all. Like, well, wait a minute now. Why are we renting these people from a completely different division that's not even in the PC business? Their mission had something to do with networking hardware, the stuff that's in a closet. And so I made a case to get them all, and was eventually able to make that happen and get the head count and the dollars to support it. And then I created an environment in which the hardware human factors people, the graphic designers and the industrial designers all work very cohesively together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also very powerful because at the time I was working for the VP of marketing for the company. So all the branding stuff was in that organization. So then I've always been a big proponent that design is a major piece of branding.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted, I started bringing branding people into these meetings. So they would be part and parcel to this. And sometimes they would do user research, had to do with branding or things like that. So we'd be all involved. So it became a much bigger play than originally, even the design center when I was in Florida in Boca Raton, much bigger in terms of the integration of these disciplines all working together on a common goal.
You kind of mentioned a few things there that are worth highlighting. Like obviously, this story has a very happy ending with, four centers and, like 100 people working on this. And obviously, there were some early victories and some design awards that you're pulling in uh,
Right.
due to all of this. Um, what that maybe you can just provide just a couple of examples to the people that would be listening of some of these early victories that you still remember.
Uh, I think there were a lot of victories surrounding the servers. They were great, and they were knocking it out of the park because instead of having these kind of ragtag mini towers that were all different sizes and shapes, they were all rack geometry based, and they could stand on the floor by themselves, or you strip the covers off and put them in racks. This was something I wanted to do back in Rochester, and I could never get anybody to do it. And I showed them this whole thing of, well, let's do it. The next thing we made all that stuff. And it was very successful. Um, and all the IBM server stuff today basically looks like that for all practical purposes, except there's some kind of mainframey kind of things today that have very geometric, kind of hard to understand or explain covers on them. I don't really understand that at all, but that's okay. So the servers were a big deal. ThinkPad continued to be,
Mhm.
because that was my side job for the first 2 years, believe it or not. I would be the PC designer by day and ThinkPad designer by night. if you can believe that. But ThinkPad, continued to flourish.
Hmm.
And I, kind of instigated this whole idea of the purposeful evolution, which caught on.
Hmm.
And it's a juggernaut now. I mean, it's impossible to stop it, or you would be crazy to stop it, should I say. In terms of the PCs, we made some really cool Aptivas. There was one called the S series that had a flat panel monitor based off of the Richard Sapper design, won all kinds of design awards. Um, there was an article once that came out that said it looked like it could uh, beat up the Apple iMac and steal its lunch money. Which I always thought was funny. That's at a time when the iMac was the kind of roly-poly jelly bean thing.
Right.
And ours looked like it was a stealth fighter. It was black and edgy and thin looking and such. And then following that, there was another project that I really pushed was I wanted to make an all-in-one, but I wanted to make an all-in-one that wasn't a jelly bean or anything like that. I would make it from a flat panel because I figured, we make a flat panel all-in-one, that Apple thing is going to look like a fossil. So I had Richard work on that, and that turned into the X40 and the X41, and it was very leadership, flat panel, black keyboard storage kind of under it, and a little pop down box that had the optical drive in
Yeah.
it. And the X41, you could remove the base and mount the whole thing on an arm so it would float above your desk. It was featured in Domus magazine, it had a fold out, a centerfold, if you can believe it.
Wow.
It was it was incredible. Those were some big wins. The monitors became very successful. People liked the way they looked. And it had a very cohesive family appearance to them. We did eventually have to modify the design to a degree because one of the guys that used to work with informed me that they used too much plastic because they had ribs on them that were reminiscent of the IBM logo, and the
Hmm.
ribs allowed us to deal with the kind of blocky shapes of the monitor housings and also transmit heat. And so there was some threatening going on of, we're going to get rid of this. We're going to go to an OEM design, just put logos on it. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Now we've worked for years on this stuff. You tell me what the bogey is for plastic and we'll beat it. So we came up with a design which used less plastic than the OEM monitors, but still looked good. And instead of a rib design, it was a fan fold. So a design that has a like this, only sharp. So it still looked like stripes, like the IBM logo, but used far, far less plastic. That was a pretty big win. There were a lot of these kind of wins. The guy, by the way, who was always torturing me about the plastic use, there was an article once that was floated all around that there was some, I don't remember what city it was, but there was some robbery or something, and an errant gunshot was stopped by one of these monitors and was attributed to the thick plastic of the IBM monitor and saved this guy's life. And I printed that thing out and took it down to his office. There's so many of these things that were successful. The first mouse that we did, the mouse today that is used is almost the same design. Sort of round in the back and slopes down towards the front,
Hmm.
and sides that are kind of like this. And that was all the genesis of that was the PC Next mouse. Um, it's kind of cool. Look at this stuff, you know, almost 30 years later, and you can see your fingerprints.
I can only try to imagine what that would be like to see something that far back and be like, I know where that started.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's cool. And these Sapper Fests, I also drug the Japan team into it because I didn't want them to feel like they were left out. So it was when we had a Sapper Fest, everybody came. At the time, there were designers in Greenock, Scotland, and in Japan, and obviously the U.S. So it was international. And Sapper, of course, would come and he would always be a very entertaining guest, to say the least. You do a whole video on Sapper stories.
Uh, Now there's an idea.
Yeah. The whole consolidation and growth of the design center, I think I think people today, there's a lot of people that work in the design center now that know nothing about any of this
Hmm.
because so many of these people who were there and these aren't there anymore. And so, a lot of people don't know that it really wasn't that long ago. There wasn't a design center at all. It was just some people sprinkled around working on individual kind of things with blinders on. Uh, and not that they were bad designers, they were good designers. They just weren't always working on the right thing. As far as I was concerned, we need to be working big picture.